Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well. How about a bonus? And for this bonus, I figure let's do state by state. So we'll start with A. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They all were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost you a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get into today's bonus, shall we? So, the first state alphabetically would be Alabama. Hey Jeff, my name is LS. Even though it's not exciting and long, I've got an encounter for you. I'm 36 years old now. At the time of my sighting when it happened, I think it was about 12 to 14 years ago, my dad had a sighting with me. He has since passed away, and I live in his and my old childhood home, now where the sighting occurred. It was late one night, around 2 in the morning. I happened to be staying with my dad that night. We were both awakened by a sound of an infant newborn screaming at the top of its lungs. Only the sound we heard was literally vibrating our insides. It was so loud, it should have hurt our ears, but somehow it didn't. We could tell the sound was coming from the shed behind the house, where he parked his trailer and one of his trucks. We stood at the back door, scared, whispering to each other what we thought it could be. The sound never stopped, mind you. It had been about 5 minutes at this point since we first awoke. We turned the floodlight on in the back of the house, and the noise keeps going. We finally work up the nerve to step onto the back deck. And me and my dad both had 12 gauges with double-aught buck aimed toward the shed. Soon as we stepped out, the noise stopped. About 10 seconds after we stepped out, something absolutely massive and pitch black in color bounds from the shed into the woods in about 3 or 4 leaps. Now the woods is at least 45 to 50 yards from the shed. It was so fast it seemed unnatural. Also, we made out that the front stood higher than the rear of the animal. It stayed on all fours the whole time we saw it. It did have a medium-length tail. We didn't see the eyes. It moved so fast it was unreal, and it didn't make out much. I live out in the woods, so it's even dark, even with a floodlight. Clark County, Alabama. I can tell you this. It was no black bear. I've seen them. This thing was massive. It was no panther. Again, way too big. Also, I don't know if Bigfoot runs on all fours, so I'm thinking Dogman. I also hear massive, deep howling in the woods, so it's not coyotes. I've been around them my entire life, and I know what they sound like. I still hear the howling this day at night. Deep in the woods, it sounds massive. I also hear weird ape, canid sounds in the woods. Also, paranormal things have happened around here. Anyway, that is my one time I actually saw a creature. I hear it several times a year, though. Thanks for your time. I've found large canine tracks. I'm going to try and take some pics next time and I'll send them to you. I'm adding this a few days later. Me and my dad, before we went out and stood there, tried our best and try and think of what it could be. So many things went through our mind as we stood there whispering to each other and listening to this god-awful sound. We should have been deaf, but we were not. Like I said, it literally vibrated our insides, so weird and hard to explain. It didn't hurt though. It actually felt kind of relaxing in a weird way. The vibrating, but God, it was a scary sound. Best thing we could think of before stepping out onto the deck was, I said, Dad, it has to be some sort of drug addict or some sorry SOB had a baby and didn't want it and left it under the shed with a large electronic megaphone by the newborn's mouth as it screamed and wailed for dear life. That was the closest thing I could think of that it sounded like, and my dad agreed. And we stepped out, even though we both knew it wasn't a human baby. I remember more as I keep dwelling on it. I tried to send this a few days ago, sent it to the wrong email. I love your show. Keep up the good work. I've been woken to the truth for about 10 years now. Not just on cryptids and paranormal, but the world we live in, and spiritual stuff as well. Thank you. So, really quick, once again, that statement where it's probably not good enough to put on the channel, people say, because it's short or it's not violent enough or whatever. That really disturbs me more than anything, because in my eyes, I think that once we've seen these creatures, that's enough. We don't need any more, just the details of what it looks like, what it did, how it acted, we are seeing something that we are told from everyone we know, from our parents, our teachers, TV, everybody, that these things don't exist. I've heard of Sasquatch running quadruped. I'm sure many of you have as well. So it may have been a Sasquatch, but the wailing baby sound it's either or, but we certainly know it's terrifying, right? All right, on to tonight's second Alabama subscriber submission. Hey Jeff, my name is MS. I was born and raised in the small town of Thomasville, Alabama, and have lived there my entire life. I'm 59 years old, and I'm a registered nurse. I grew up on a dirt road in an old house that my great-grandfather had built. There was thick woods behind the house and across the dirt road in front of the house. This land is still owned by my family. The old house sadly burnt down when lightning struck it years ago. I had 2 younger brothers and 2 sisters. We would play for hours on end in these woods, on both sides of the road. We would even venture out for a considerable distance to get to the creek that was in the middle of the woods, so that we could collect arrowheads and beads that we would find along the creek. One summery day, all of us and 2 of my cousins were playing hide and seek across the road at the edge and somewhat into the woods. There had been at one time an old house that belonged to my great aunt situated there, but it had been torn down many years ago, and it was all debris. Brick from the house was piled up, with several feet of brick and broken blocks sitting on top of the pile. I was about 8 years old. I was it, and had to start counting till 50 while everyone else hid. I leaned against some of the bricks facing toward the road with my head down and counting. When I reached 50, I ran forward about 40 or so feet and looked around. I didn't see any signs of anyone, so I turned around and ran back toward the brick pile. I looked out toward the wood line past the bricks, and something caught my eye at the very top of the pile. I was completely horrified to see a face of something that had jet black, long, disheveled hair and black hair on its face, as well as what looked to be a beard and hair above its lip. Its eyes were open very wide and were very large. This thing was staring right at me, and its eyes were black as its hair. I was so scared that I couldn't move. I kept my eyes on this creature or whatever the whole time I stood there frozen, after what seemed to be an eternity. I watched as the face very slowly eased itself down behind this brick pile, and when I could no longer see anything of it, I slowly eased. When I came to my senses, I'm sorry guys, I came to my senses and turned around and ran as fast as my little feet could carry me toward the house. As it happened, all the other kids had decided to go across the road and hide, so that I would have a harder time finding them. I never said anything to my mom about what I saw. As a matter of fact, I never told anyone about my encounter until fairly recently. I think my fear was just so overwhelming that I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. As far as I remember, I never did go near that part of the woods again until I was a teen. I know for a fact this was not a mean trick by my mother or dad, or by my uncle or aunt. Both men were gone at work, and my mom nor aunt were the type to pull a prank. My mom was in the kitchen cooking when I ran into the house. I still don't know what it was that I saw. Now that I'm grown and know what scientists proclaim a neanderthal looks like, that's the closest thing I've ever seen to what I saw that day in the edge of the woods. Huh. I put, wow, that was creepy. Do you remember if this thing had any clothes or anything like that? I don't remember seeing any type of clothing. All I could see was its head and the top part of its neck. To me, that sounds like a feral person more than anything. Which, in my eyes, feral people are just as scary than Dogman and Bigfoot and anything else. These Neanderthal-like primitive people living in the outskirts of humanity is insane. You know, my dad and I were just talking about feral people the other day, and how if a small group of these people caught you, you'd probably never be seen again. I did ask him, actually, because he's got a lot of little weird stories, my dad. And I said, do you think there's any feral in the Adirondacks? And his exact words were, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't either, to be honest with you. I think if there's enough woods with enough food source and water source and cave, I think there will be feral people. So, alright, moving on. The next encounter is, there's a little bit of information about this person. Stuff that I can't really disclose, but her father did work at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, and he had he had some access, let's just say that. So, and she thinks that part of her, one of her experiences has something to do with where her dad worked and what he did. So, here goes. We lived in Marshall County, a very small town. We did not live close to this town, but we were still considered part of it, so that you can get the picture of what it's like. We lived on a long dirt road with only 5 houses spread out over the area. All the houses were built on the same side of the road across the street, and behind us were woods. All there was huge pastures beside and a wooded area. Across and down from our home, we had the only 2-story house on that road. Why this detail is relevant will make more sense about my encounter. The land was 2-tier, big backyard, sizable front yard. There was a rock wall with a flower bed and steps to the upper tier of the yard. Fast forward 2 or 3 months later, my dad had gotten some chickens, and in mornings we went out to feed and water them, and the chickens would be dead. They were inside of their chicken coop with a latch on it to keep the other wildlife from getting away. There had been a chicken coop with a latch on it to keep the other wild animals away. There had also been something like 100 chickens, and they had all been taken, and sometimes, like I said, dead. I remember one morning going out with our housekeeper. There were chickens with their intestines pulled out inside the coop, while others were just missing and gone. It was then decided it was the neighbor's tomcat who was doing this. So the neighbor and my brother decided to hunt down this cat and shoot it. During this, I was sent inside because, of course, I was crying, telling my dad not to let this happen. I have always loved animals, and I do believe what they were doing was wrong. Then a week goes by, and some more chickens were being killed and disappearing. Then it was decided during the second week to go ahead and kill the rest of the chickens before there was not any more left. Some were not fully grown yet, and some were half the size as the older ones were. Yet the decision was made. There was a predator out there that is able to get them, and no one could figure out what it was. So it was the beast to harvest them before none of them were left. So it was best to harvest them before none of them were left. A week or two later, I had started to hear what I thought were dogs howling outside near or in our front yard. I was awoken almost every night. It was not just one howl, but many, like it was a pack. I also knew nobody had any dogs anywhere on our street. Dogs were a luxury back in 1966. It was nothing like today where a lot of people have dogs, or many dogs, or one dog or many dogs. This is where my encounter differs. I woke up to the howling outside again, but this time was different than the other nights. There was a wall heater in my room. The red coils in the heater were bright red, and the whole room glowed. The room was so hot, I got up to turn it down. The closer I moved toward it, the hotter it seemed to become. The heat was so intense I could not get near it. It looked like the whole wall was on fire. The red light was not natural at all. I moved to my side of the room, away from the heat. I just stood there for a while. I was scared and didn't know what I was supposed to do. I jumped into the bed beside my sister and threw the sheet over my head. Now, it wasn't just the howling, but my room was unbearably hot and glowing red. This continued for a couple of nights, the howling outside, the wall glowing red, the heat making it so hot and never being able to get close enough to turn it down. After the third night of the hot, glowing red wall, I asked my dad if he was coming into my room and turning the heat up while I was asleep, and he said no. I then asked Miss Katie if she had been going into our room, and she said no. I told them it was coming on at night and making our room very hot. My dad said, "You know it will come on by itself if it gets too cold in your room." So the 6-year-old genius that I was decided to turn the heater off, and that I did. The night, no red glow or horrible heat waking us up, or the next night. I was diligent in making sure the heater was off every night. I made sure the dial was turned all the way to the left. Third night, double-checked the dial, and yes, it was in the off position. I lied down and fell asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard the howling again. The wall was glowing red, and it felt hotter than all the other times before. I knew I had to turn the heater off, so I got up to see if it had been turned on somehow. As I moved toward the wall, I can't get near it. Again, it was so hot. It was burning my face, my arm and hand, where I had tried to block my face from the heat. I bent down to see if I could see any person, and there was I bent down to see if I could at least see the dial, and there was no checking it. It was just too hot. The howling seemed to grow louder. It sounded like it was right outside of my window. I saw movement in the window. I started to straighten back up. The curtains were only partially open. I couldn't move. I was scared. So I tilted my head a little to the side so I could see if something was really by our window. As I leaned closer, I thought it was probably just my reflections. Then the yellow eyes were visible in the teeth. They were very large teeth. I could see its claws resting on the outside of the windowsill. Its ears were like those of a German shepherd, but more pointy. It seemed like we looked at each other for a long time. What caused me to run was he seemed to smile at me. It was not a smile like a nice, "Hello, nice to meet you." It was as if he was letting me know he had seen me, and he knew I had seen him, and then ran to the side of my room and covered completely up. I peeked out, and he was still standing in my window. His head seemed to be turned slightly, as if he knew I was trying to peek out. As I was looking at it, I started to look around my room, and there was the red grid. It was completely surrounding all 4 walls of my room. At that time, I thought it was a red fence. It also overlaid the glowing red wall. At first, I thought it was part of the glowing red, that I was going to be cooked. As I got older, I figured out that it was a grid of some type. Also, to my shame, my babysitter was sleeping by the window. I didn't pull her away from the window. I just hid under the covers, looking out every once in a while, hoping this complete nightmare would just go away. I did fear that it was going to come through the window. I didn't know where it went. I do know the window was on the 2nd story. It vanished and was gone, just as quiet as when it appeared. The red grid came back a few nights. The howling became distant, and then completely stopped. I started to have night terrors after that. To this day, my kids know if they wake me up to stand from a distance. They have received a phone, remote control, and other items launched at them. Nightmares of this thing standing over me, physically holding my wrist, are common. I get to see him very clearly, and what makes him so bad is coming out of sleep, opening my eyes, and there is a moment where it is there. I punch at it to keep it away from me, and then it's gone. My dad remarried. She hated where we lived and moved us all back to Huntsville, where I never heard or saw anything like that. When I was 12, we moved to Washington State. Before anyone asks, nope, never seen, smelled, or heard Bigfoot. In fact, up here, have not run into what is referred to the Big Three. Though I've seen some weird things. Thanks for reading, Jeff. All right, folks, a lot of great experiences right there to start this state-by-state bonus uploads. I think that's what we'll do for bonuses from now on, is we'll do state-by-state, and then maybe country to country worldwide. So I hope you enjoyed them as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. Guys, thank you for supporting the channel. Your support is what makes this channel special and what continues to make it grow and go. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real, they're out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions and never stop searching for those answers.